Hello, my name is Ben Walker and I'm here today working with Promise Yourself to tell you guys some things that we're just not taught about at school. So talking about finances, taxes, buying a house, mortgages, all that kind of stuff. But today we're talking about buying buy-to-let properties. Now, buy-to-lets is obviously for landlords. Is it a good idea to become a landlord or not? That's completely up to you. So this short video is going to run through a few of the pros, a few of the cons, what to watch out for, and whether or not you should start it through a company or privately. Now, there are quite a few big advantages about becoming a landlord and buying some property with a buy-to-let mortgage. Now, first of all, obviously you are still buying a property. Now, with rising house prices, it's not always feasible to actually buy a property for yourself just to live in, because they are getting insanely expensive at the moment. Now, if you were to buy with a buy-to-let mortgage with a view to rent out that property, then normally the income that you get from renting out that property will be enough to cover the mortgage payments, which means that in reality it's not going to cost you that much to rent it out then. So you can still buy the property and then make some money off it, and at the end of your mortgage term you're still going to be owning a property. Now, another big advantage of buying buy-to-let properties is after a while, if you keep buying loads and loads and loads of properties, you could generate a passive income. Now, there is a separate post coming out just on passive income, so give that a look when it comes out. But basically, it's a way of making money that requires a lot less work than actually working. Now, I'm not saying that buy-to-let properties are completely passive, because they're not. They can still be quite a lot of responsibility. But if you have enough properties, you can actually make enough money to not really have to work, especially if you farm out these properties to different companies that do all the managing for you. So that can be a really, really effective way to cut back on your work hours but still make a decent amount of money. Now, a final big advantage is the fact that house prices are actually rising. So if you were to buy a buy-to-let property now, then chances are, obviously we don't know this for a fact, but chances are that properties in value are going to keep on rising. So if you buy it now for, let's say, £150,000, in 10 years time it could be worth £200,000, £250,000, we don't know, but the rate it's going at the moment, you could stand to make a nice big profit on these properties. Now, of course, this is all completely dependent on where you buy the property, what kind of condition it's in, whether or not you maintain it. There's loads of stipulations about whether or not you'll actually make the money. But there's a decent chance that the house prices are going to continue to rise, and if it does, you can make a whole chunk of cash. So now I'm going to talk about what to watch out for. Now, obviously, buying a buy-to-let property, it's not risk-free, and there are some rules and regulations which have made it a little bit more difficult to actually make money. Now, first of all, there's been a 3% surcharge in stamp duty. Now, stamp duty is just a tax, which basically means every time you buy land or property in England or Ireland, you basically have to pay a tax on it. There's different rules for Wales and Scotland, but in England and Ireland you have stamp duty. Now, this 3% doesn't sound by much, but it could end up costing you a fair bit of cash. Now, also, there's been changes to how we pay tax. Now, you used to get a 40% tax basically break on any payments you make on your mortgage. So any payments you make on a mortgage, 40% of that you don't get taxed on. Whereas now you get a 20% tax credit. Now, if you're not paying that much tax in the first place, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you are paying a load of tax, then this 40 to 20% can make a massive difference and can end up costing you thousands of pounds. In a bit, I'm going to talk to you about why you should start up with a limited liability company to run these buy-to-let properties, and that could help you get around this tax change, but we'll get to that later. Now, obviously, being a landlord is quite a lot of responsibility. Like I said earlier, you're not going to be able to get rid of all the responsibility by farming it out to different companies. You'll still be the landlord, you will still have some level of responsibility to maintain the property at a decent quality. We don't want to have all our tenants living in, just horrific conditions, as I did in my first year of uni. So just make sure that you understand it's not a free ride. You cannot just buy the property and leave it. You do have to make sure you maintain it properly. Now, Also, as I said, it's a risk. There is no guarantee that you're going to make money on this property. As I said earlier, house prices have been rising, but they can just suddenly drop. We just don't know. So if you do buy the property, there's no guarantee that it's going to continue to rise in price and value, that is. And also, if you are tied into the mortgage and the value of the house suddenly drops, you're going to still be paying that mortgage, okay? You do not have a drop in the value of the mortgage because you borrowed a certain amount, you have to pay that money back. And of course, as with buying any property, it is still expensive. You need a pretty hefty deposit, you need to prove that you can actually afford the mortgage repayments. So it's not a walk in the park by any stretch. It's still quite tough to even get a buy-to-let mortgage, especially if you're a first-time buyer, which most of the people watching this video probably would be. So it's not a walk in the park. There are some things to take into account. So just make sure that you understand the risks and also there are benefits, so you need to weigh them up and make your own decision. So like I said earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit about setting up through a limited liability company. Now you can either buy these properties privately or through the limited company. There are some pros to both, there's some disadvantages to both. But first of all, the good thing about setting up as a limited liability company is that company is its own separate legal entity, okay? So that keeps you and the company separate. So that means that if the company can't keep up with its mortgage repayments on the properties it has, that's not going to affect you. The only thing that you would lose would be the money you invested into the company. Whereas if you buy privately, if you can't keep up with the mortgage repayments, then the people you're trying to pay will then come for your property that you actually live in and any of your assets. So by keeping them separate, you give yourself a little bit more protection. Also, if you set up with a limited liability company, you could manage to get around the recent tax changes. Now, like I said, the tax has changed from 40% tax rebate to a 20% tax credit. That's a big change, but if you're a limited company, you only pay 19% corporation tax. Now this can save you a whole load of money, and also any payments that you make on the mortgage are then classed as business expenses and therefore don't have to be taxed. So any money that you make and then goes towards a mortgage isn't actually taxed. So again, this can save you a whole load of money. Now, like I said, there are some negatives to setting up with a limited liability company. Firstly, there's actually less lenders who are willing to lend to a limited company to buy just houses. You need to make sure that your affordability is absolutely perfect, especially for buying your first house, because if it's the company's first time buying a house, again, there's no record, there's nothing to show that this company can actually afford to keep those payments up. Now, I know I said that most times the rental income will be able to cover the mortgage, but that's not always guaranteed, okay? And that's what lenders are thinking. Lenders are thinking, how risky is this? Will they definitely have tenants in? Will they definitely be able to pay back the mortgage? So make sure your affordability is absolutely on point and you should be fine. But again, it's not a guarantee. There's also a potential for quite a few extra costs. For example, you have to pay accountants and maybe lawyers, and you'd also have to maybe pay lots and lots of other stuff just basically set up the company. For example, filing the company's house. There's a little bit of extra rigmarole to go through basically. So again, it's good, it's bad, it's a judgment call. It's completely up to you guys whether or not you want to set up the limited company or not. I'm not going to give my opinion on it, but make sure you read the guide below and that can give you a little bit more information. So you've seen this video and you still want to go forward with getting a buy-to-let property. This is how you're going to do it. First things, you want to speak to a financial advisor. They'll be able to tell you whether or not you can actually afford it and how much you want to be spending on this and all of that kind of stuff. A financial advisor is very, very important, because if you just dive in head first, you may not end up in a comfortable situation. You might put all your money in and that's just not a good idea. So make sure you do speak to an advisor and some people who are maybe a little bit more knowledgeable than you to actually make this decision. If you decided then you've got the finances to go forward, you're all settled, you can do this, great. From there you need to find the right property. Don't just buy the first one you see on the market. You need to find the property that you think will be able to give you the returns you need and isn't too much money. So do a little bit of shopping around. Use all the comparison sites, use all of the estate agents around you. Make sure you find a property that will be right for you. Generally, it's better to live in the area that you're renting with the only properties. That way, if something does go wrong, you can be on call to fix it any time. But if you want to go a bit further afield, chances are you'll just have to have another business look after the property for you, which can cost a little bit more money. So now you've got the mortgage, you've got the property, it's all sorted, you've got to find tenants. That is the one most important thing after the house that you actually need to get. You can go about this any number of ways. You can advertise on Facebook, you can advertise privately, you can advertise through estate agents. It's completely up to you, or just do all of it until you find the right tenant. It's also really important to make sure you have Landlords Insurance, okay? Because things go wrong. You want to make sure that you are protected and won't have to shell out loads of money if something doesn't go right. For example, if your tenants don't pay the money, a Landlord Insurance, that could help you get that money back. So just make sure that you are properly covered, read the terms and conditions, don't just skim through it, so you know exactly how protected you are. Now you may think that once you've got the tenants in, that's the end of it, you're happy days, you're making money. But it's also really important to review your mortgage every time the fixed term ends, because when you agree a mortgage, you have a fixed term set at a certain level, and at the end of this term, chances are that's going to go up, so you'll be paying more interest, it'll cost you more money. When this happens, it can be a really, really good idea to just remortgage, and that way you can keep it at a fixed term, paying a reasonable amount, and it can end up saving you thousands of pounds. So just make sure you're checking your mortgage term, that you're not paying too much interest, and if you decide to pay off early, you can keep bringing that interest down, keep bringing those repayments down, and that again can save you a load of money too. So hopefully you've learned something. We've gone through most of the things you need to know if you want to be a landlord. Again, read the guide, and that's going to tell you a little bit more as well. The most important thing to remember is just to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask people who may know a little bit more than you. So financial advisors, parents, family members, they've all been through this kind of stuff. They've had to get mortgages, so just make sure you are asking the right questions. My name's Ben Walker. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you guys again soon.